By July of 1944, the euphoria of the D-Day landings had completely vanished, replaced by a suffocating, terrifying reality. The Allied advance in Normandy hadn't just stalled, it had choked. This wasn't a war of sweeping, maneuverist warfare across the open plains of Europe. This was the bocage. This was a green nightmare. A 1,000-year-old labyrinth of massive, ancient hedgerows, dense, immovable walls of dirt and tree roots, often 10 feet high, crisscrossing the French countryside in tiny, deadly grids. Every single field was a naturally fortified killing zone, designed centuries ago for agricultural boundary, but now transformed by the German army into a perfect defensive labyrinth. Behind these walls, German anti-tank guns, snipers, and machine gun nests waited in ambush. For the Allied armored columns, the hedgerows were a death trap. To cross a field, American and British tanks had to climb over the hedgerows, exposing their vulnerable, lightly armored underbellies to enemy fire at point-blank range. Within weeks, the roads were littered with the smoldering, twisted metal of hundreds of Sherman tanks. Both American and British High Command were in a state of operational panic. The attack doctrine was failing, the casualties were unsustainable, and no one knew how to break the deadlock. It was in this atmosphere of tactical paralysis that a delegation of forward British military observers arrived at the front lines of the American Fifth Corps sector near St. Lo. These were not armchair generals. They were experienced armored officers, veterans of North Africa, deeply versed in methodical British combined arms warfare. They had come to assess American progress, perhaps exchange tactical notes, but mostly, they were skeptical. They viewed American armored strategy as inexperienced, prone to haste, and lacking the deep-seated tradition of methodical British methodology. But as the British officers were guided forward through the maze of the hedgerows, the sensory overload was immediate. The air was thick with the acidic tang of cordite, the heavy scent of burning diesel, and the chaotic, staccato symphony of an active, brutal battle. The rattle of 90mm machine guns, the earth-shaking thump of 88mm shells, and the desperate shouts of infantrymen under fire. They weren't taken to a command post. Instead, they were guided to a defilade position, just behind the front-line attack. And there, under a makeshift camouflage net that seemed absurdly inadequate, they saw something that defies all their understanding of civilized warfare. They did not see troops preparing an assault. They saw what looked like a roadside garage transplanted into hell. In the middle of this chaos, under direct observed enemy artillery fire, a crippled M4 Sherman tank was surrounded by a squad of grease-stained, mud-covered American GI mechanics. The rear engine deck was ripped open, exposing the heart of the beast. Sparks from an oxyacetylene torch illuminated the smoke-filled air, competing with the distant flashes of German gunfire. The British officers were forced to stop, paralyzed not by fear, but by absolute operational shock. What the British observers were watching wasn't just a repair job, it was a clash of empires, a display of two completely different philosophies of how to fight an industrial war. For the British, logistics was a vital support function, managed systematically, but always separate from the battlefield itself. A crippled tank meant a painstaking recovery, a slow journey back to a specialized rear echelon depot, and a meticulous, craft-based repair that could take days or weeks. But for the American mechanics of the 7th Armored Division's Ordnance Battalion, there was no rear. Every single one of them was first and foremost a soldier, trained for combat, but their primary weapon wasn't a rifle, it was industrial speed. These were the children of Detroit, the assembly line experts who had been drafted into the engine of democracy. The British officers watched, fascinated, as the American mechanics operated with a frenetic, almost surgical confidence. They didn't see filing or hammering. They didn't see custom modifications. They saw the application of pure, mathematical uniformity. The Americans were swapping out an entire engine block of the crippled Sherman in 4 hours flat, using standardized parts pulled straight from wooden crates shipped across the Atlantic from Michigan. To the British, this was mechanical sorcery. They had been trained on a logistical system that required skilled technicians to customize repairs. The Americans had simply replaced the skill with standardization. Detroit was fighting the war by shipping the assembly line itself directly to the front. The British officers, initially dismissive of American mechanical competence, were now glued to the scene. Their tactical skepticism was being systematically dismantled by a display of raw, industrial audacity. The battle raging just fields away was intense, with German shells occasionally throwing geysers of mud and dirt perilously close to the repair site. The American mechanics didn't even flinch. They just wiped the oil from their eyes and kept turning wrenches. Suddenly, the tone of the repair changed. As the mechanics finalized the engine install, their leader, a young Sergeant Curtis Coulin, picked up a massive piece of crude scrap metal, jagged, triangular prongs salvaged from a destroyed German beach obstacle. Under the camouflage net, in the middle of battle, Coulin positioned the scrap against the front hull of another nearby tank. The welder ignited. The sparks were brilliant against the green darkness. Coulin was not asking permission. He was not drafting blueprints. He had been authorized by his captain to innovate, to bypass doctrine, to solve the hedgerow problem right there on the killing ground. The British observers watched, stunned, as this improvised modification, the now famous Coulin hedgerow cutter, was welded directly onto the tank in minutes. These grease-stained soldiers were not just fixing machines, they were actively rewriting tactical doctrine in real time, inventing the solution to the entire bocage deadlock under direct enemy fire. As the smoke from the welder cleared and the newly modified Sherman tank roared to life, its diesel engine screaming a triumphant defy to the German artillery, the British officers were silent. The modified tank didn't wait for permission. It immediately turned and violently charged the very hedgerow wall where American attacks had failed days before. Instead of climbing over, the Coulin cutter sliced through the ancient wall of earth and roots like a hot knife through butter. The German defenders behind the wall, expecting a climbing target, were completely blindsided by a Sherman crashing through their wall horizontally. The position was instantly overrun. For the British delegation, the lesson was overwhelming. The Americans were not inexperienced or reckless. They were the world's first masters of total industrial warfare. They had won the battle not with brilliant strategy, but with sheer mechanical velocity. They had redefined logistics not as a support function, but as an active, offensive weapon system that could neutralize any defensive advantage through sheer, relentless speed of action. When the British officers returned to their headquarters, their assessment had changed completely. They understood they were fighting alongside an army that could appear anywhere on the map, dig in within minutes, and turn any tactical deadlock into a mechanical solution that left the enemies of democracy drowning in the raw power of standard parts and Detroit assembly lines.